Hello, listeners and viewers. I'm ahead of the curve, and in today's interview slash discussion, I have the one and only Riley Morgan of Doubt Society podcast and blog. I guess you could also categorize it, right? Because you do a lot of writing alongside your podcast. You've done three. Is it three now episodes?
Yes, I just think I finished the third full length about a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago.
Yeah, and for anyone who is unfamiliar, because I was actually featured on your podcast, which was amazing. I loved the conversation, especially on Hitch, the one and only. Yeah, so maybe you can go a bit into your podcast and what you do, and then we'll get straight into the topic at hand.
Sure. So thanks for having me, James. I really appreciate you having me on. So James mentions Doubt Society. Doubt Society is the name of both my podcast and a blog where I write. And I wanted to start Doubt Society really just to talk about a lot of the big questions, to talk about religion, to talk about faith, and to talk about how we think about those things. And so, you can expect all sorts of discussions around that, and that's the primary focus. But it's also hopefully as it grows, will be more inclusive than that. Talk about literature and politics, even some. I got into that a little bit in the last episode as well. So it's really going to branch out to a degree, but doubt is sort of the idea that frames all of the subject matter that I want to talk about and want to have guests on to discuss. So, and not doubt in sort of a frivolous way, but in a rather serious way that encourages critical thinking and thinking for yourself. And you referenced Hitch earlier, as Hitch would say, treating all experts as if they are mammals. And I think that's a lovely way in which to live one's life. And so I'm trying with this project to encourage that behavior, both in myself and in other people.
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, I think what you're doing is really cool, and you have the background sorted out. You have, all the gear for it, which, to be honest, is when I started out for YouTube, it's honestly one of the biggest hurdles is actually just like, not only thinking, okay, well, maybe I want to do this, but also, but I need to get all this and this and this. And that definitely was something that put me off kind of, but then one day I was literally like, look, I have stuff to say about this book, and it literally took me about 15 takes, but I got the video out. And you can even view it on my channel, the first video, and it's just really awkward. I was like literally very nervous, and it was but I got it out, and that's the thing. And I'm so glad that you're now sort of in the ether of these sort of topics to do with critical thinking, like you were saying. So as the title hopefully suggests, I'm talking to you today specifically about your past of being an evangelical, well, a very devout evangelical Christian, as you said before we recorded. So can you walk us through, I suppose, like the journey, the beginning, like how you got to that place, or were you plucked into it, or placed into it? So how has the past sort of shaped now? What's your story been?
Sure. So I was born and bred evangelical. So I didn't come to find it at a later age in life. It was from the beginning, from the get-go. So my mother was a Catholic growing up, and my dad was a Southern Baptist, the child of a family that went to a Southern Baptist. So, and I mean the type of Southern Baptist, if you're not familiar with, like the preachers like weeping the entire sermon and like jumping up and down the aisle. And that's not an exaggeration. I've been to these types of services since then. And then mother completely opposite, being Catholic, as my dad said, far too much kneeling and standing and kneeling and standing. And so they settled, or I like to say, on a non-denominational, like Church of Christ, evangelical, kind of a middle ground. And so that was what I was brought up in, and was church on Sundays, well, twice on Sundays, Wednesday nights, Bible study every day, both in school, because I was homeschooled, and then I had personal devotions, and then oftentimes other sort of Bible studies throughout the week. So it was consistent. It was very consistent, and I loved it. I loved all of it, and I was very confident in my worldview. And at the age of, I think I was 12 or 13, I had my sort of altar call moment, where we had a traveling preacher come to our church, and they were holding a revival, sort of week-long sermons every night, which was, it wasn't, I'd say it wasn't like a revival like some people think, like we're way out in the middle of nowhere, like in this tiny little church, like in a tent. This was a pretty large evangelical church, like a couple thousand people. So they still called it revival, but if you watch, like, I don't know, certain Netflix documentaries or other things on YouTube, you might think I'm like in a tent in, Arkansas. But it wasn't really like that. I'm from the Midwest, fairly large town. And so he was a great storyteller, and he shared the gospel, and I remember just physically shaking, like parts of me were like quivering that I did not know could quiver. And just felt, and of course the thought at the time was God calling, and went forward. And although I was already raised as a Christian, you have your still individual moment of conversion, and then was baptized. And I went all through high school and continued to be very involved in the church, doing all sorts of different ministry. Went on a missions trip that me and my friends organized to Honduras, fundraised and went down there, lots of ministry with the homeless. And I was very serious about it. And when I decided what I wanted, when I got to the age where I needed to decide what to do with my life, I thought, well, if this is really what I believe, then what could be a better way to spend my life than to tell other people about this? And so I decided that I wanted to go to a Bible college, to a university, to study homiletics, or to study preaching. And so that's what I did. So I went to a couple different universities, and ended up settling on one, and set off there. And while in college, that is when I first started to see the cracks in the wall. So I'll pause there if you have any questions or thus far.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking a second ago that it's interesting that legitimately, when you did go to study it, in its more sophisticated form, let's say, that's when you found there to be holes in it. And it's interesting because some people just get this instinct of like, oh well, I don't really know how I feel about this, I've kind of grown out of it. But you actually went to study it, and that is what brought about this doubt. I just found that really, really interesting.
Yeah. So I was, it got to the point where I decided that, I'm serious enough about this that I want to make it my life. I mean, it was already my life in so many ways, and I just thought this is just the next natural step. And I thought about doing missions work, but I decided that I probably was going to do either something like missions work, or just start a church, or, become part of a church. So I began my, attend this school, and I think it was my freshman year, my first semester. And I had this class, and it was taught by a guy who'd been a missionary in Africa. And it was at 7:35 a.m., which if it had been at any other holy time of the day, I probably would still be a Bible believing Christian. But it was at that ungodly hour, 7:35 a.m. And I remember a particular class where he was talking about David Platt, who is a Christian minister and wrote this book, actually, book called Radical. And they showed this video of David Platt where he is standing in India, and he has a sort of religious site behind him in the background, and is being filmed. And there's an enormous amount of people behind him, and he begins speaking with great conviction about how all these people behind him are going to hell, and they'd never heard the gospel, in which he made that clear, and that they were all destined, for eternal dereliction in hell. And I don't want to give the impression that I wasn't already very serious about Bible study and didn't already have a very complete Christian worldview. It wasn't like this wasn't the first time I heard this, but it was something about the conviction in David Platt that sort of struck me, and the idea that here's all these people who haven't even heard the message, right, and then they're destined for hell. And although I really already believed that, it was something about that moment that just struck me. It struck me in a way that hadn't in the past, and it began to get the wheels turning. And I thought, man, what sort of an individual or sort of a God is going to send people to this eternal hell that have just never heard about him? What part about what of that is loving? And so that was sort of the beginning of what became, a year-long probably deconversion, maybe a little bit longer, but something like that, where that was the first pillar that went, and then after that it just sort of one after another.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is conversion and deconversion is a process, I think, and a lot of people sort of regard it as this black and white, this happened, therefore I am not something anymore, or I am something. And for you, very much, it as you said, it was this process. And I guess you were researching more, reading more. I mean, what resources did you use? I mean, because you were surrounded by people who were holding these beliefs. So were there people around you that didn't have that faith, or how did you get access to resources in a place where everybody is contrary to those resources?
Right. That's a good question. Well, luckily for me, it's the university I went to wasn't terribly conservative. So I could find, the first people I was kind of exposed to, people like Sam Harris or, Bertrand Russell, on the shelves of the library in the university. But for me, I started with hell, and I started thinking about that and thinking about that critically. And I started playing around with different ideas about hell. And I remember reading Rob Bell's Love Wins, which was he's a very popular pastor, spiritual figure in the States. So I started kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe he believes in universalism. So the idea that when we die, we are eventually all united with Christ, whether we experience hell in some sort of purifying way, but eventually all people are like reunited with God. All things return to God. And I was that made an impression on me. And so I sort of started playing around with like more liberalized Christianity instead of this traditional evangelical view. So I started reading different sorts of just more liberal Christians, and I was looking. I could tell I was just looking for something. These answers, what I was getting from just basic my classes and from basic even just apologetics works that I'd started reading, I just didn't feel like I was getting an honest answer to me. And it wasn't that I felt that people were evil or even like that they were lying. It was just it didn't strike me as someone who's being entirely honest, and even with themselves. And so I kind of worked through liberal Christianity, very quickly. Really, it's just a few months. I mean, and people may laugh at that. Who spend years and years and years thinking about these sort of things, but it was a pretty quick process. And it was all consuming. It was all consuming. It's all I did. I went to class. I came home. I read. I written my own books, bought my own books, spent time on what was YouTube or this or that. And I wasn't happy with liberalized Christianity. And I remember I finally picked up a book by a non-believer. He would classify himself as an agnostic, and it was Vincent, I believe it's Bugliosi. He was the individual who wrote Helter Skelter, and he wrote a book called The Divinity of Doubt, which was a case for agnosticism, his case for agnosticism. And as a prosecutor, it's kind of like God he's like treating God almost on the stand. And it was very well written. And the honesty that I felt was being presented of just, here, I don't know, like, here's why I don't know. And here's my reasoning for that. It hit me in the face. It was like a breath of fresh air. I just felt that I'm like, this is someone who I felt was being truly, truly honest. And from there, I kind of stopped reading a lot of the more liberalized Christianity and went more so, and then started reading others, and went to Sam Harris and to Christopher Hitchens, and then to, other individuals like Bertrand Russell, and I mean, the list goes on and on. And it went down the slippery slope, as they say, from there.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, because the new atheists are criticized not only by religious and atheists alike, but I am wondering what your response is to the claim by, well, both parties, I suppose, saying that the new atheists' criticisms are very surface level, because I personally hold that perspective. Like, it's not that they didn't do a good job of exposing religion at its worst, but that's kind of what they did, and not much else, philosophically speaking. So that's that. I mean, I've read their kind of books, and I'm a fan of most of them, but at the same time, I realize that they're not philosophically that enticing. I'm wondering now, just taking it more to the present, what are your thoughts on their arguments in terms of how honest they are necessarily? Because I think they can be accused in some regard of actually, and ironically, being very fundamentalist in their preaching of atheism. Not to have another pun there.
Yeah. They tend to be people. The joke is that I went from one sort of evangelical religion to another, right? It's like, oh, he's got a podcast. I mean, once a preacher, always a preacher. I can't, part of me is my personality is I'm a sharer. I share thoughts. I like public speaking. I like being on a stage. So part of that, I just can't get away from that sort of, that's just what I'm used to. But as for the new atheists were very dear to me, because they were, when this was all happening, you get on YouTube and you might, Google one of the, you search the search bar or whatever, as those of us who are, millennials will do. And so that's who came up, right? It wasn't some of the more what we consider like rigorous philosophical, people who've worked on the idea of God. You don't get Nietzsche debating William Lane Craig, unfortunately. It's Hitch, right? It's somebody else. It's not like Mackey or, these other individuals who people, I think, treat more seriously in their philosophical examination of the question of God. But I really still find great value in the new atheists. I think that they are really sort of, they're misunderstood in the sense that the Christians picked the 4 books that they put out, and their like basic arguments and said, oh, this is it. Like, this is what constitutes their argument against religion. And I thought it's just almost disingenuous, because these people, yes, they take up this case, but none of these people even profess to be, to have like a deep background in these things, right? Christopher Hitchens was a journalist. I mean, wrote about everything from politics to also religion later in life. Dawkins is a biologist, Dennett's a philosopher of consciousness, philosopher of the mind, has done a lot on evolution and the philosophy of like, biological evolution and so on and so forth. So they get to these books, and to go to these books for philosophical, elucidation on why God is not, doesn't exist, I think is, you're asking for more than what you're asking for a different thing than they're offering. To me, that's like going to a Transformers movie and expecting plot. Like, no, you don't go to a Michael Bay movie expecting a great plot. You go there expecting things to explode and for it to look really cool on the
We'll Megan
screen.
Fox bending over a car bonnet.
Yes, yeah, that's what you treat it for. And for the new atheists, I think they're introductory material. And their arguments, while often it is just rhetoric, that's what you need when you first get into it. You need different ways of thinking about these things. The way they presented the idea of atonement as being this backwards sort of like wicked idea, or the way they just kind of spin the idea of like hell, or like look at how heaven is this totalitarian state. These aren't traditional philosophical arguments against God, but they make the wheels turn. They make people start to look at things in ways they hadn't looked at them in the past. And to me, I think that's step one, is to begin to look at these things in a different idea, and to begin to, yes, look at the worst case for religion, because a lot of what they use in these books is the worst case. And I'd say that Christians often do the same thing in their books against atheism, right? I mean, how many times do we hear about, the 20th century and, Mao and Nazism and, communism and the whole, and it's true, like there have been wicked people of both beliefs. And so, I think you can't look to get out of them what they're not offering. You can't look for the most philosophically rigorous defense of atheism and God is not great. It's just you're not looking in the right spot. But for what they are, I think they did a good job.
I think, I guess the counter argument to that, from being the devil's advocate, from a Christian's point of view, or a Muslim's point of view, in a way, they kind of pretended it as if they did offer those kind of arguments. And I think that's what rubs people the wrong way as well. It's like, Hitchens, for example, with his does religion poison everything? I mean, can you get any more grandiose than that, right? And so and Dawkins in the God Delusion, he's as if, he's sort of saying, like, comparing God to the tooth fairy. I mean, look, as much as I see what he's going for, when you take into account the historical and cultural background behind the idea of God, as not only as a concept but in different denominations of belief, he was terribly it's a surface level analogy, I think. I mean, I'm all for understanding the base idea behind that, but he was actually using that to argue against it. And yeah, I think, I think to be the devil's advocate, like, they in some sense profess as if it's all solved, all done and dusted, but actually it isn't, in the sense that they're not arguing well enough for it to be the case. I do definitely 100% agree with you that they're great gateway books. I mean, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. Like that seed of doubt is all we need as humans on any concept to start questioning and for a head start, first step up the ladder. So I think, and I said this as well as you, I do believe that they have their utility, but at the same time, I think Dennett is a very, I don't really include him that much, because I find his work to be very dry. He didn't really contribute to anything, particularly in New Atheism anyway. I mean, his work on consciousness is hit or miss, considering the ratings and people's reviews. But the other guys, much more rhetoric. But yeah, I don't know. It just feels like, and I want your response to this. It's like they kind of pretended as if they were arguing the best arguments. And even nowadays, when I watch Hitchens, for example, he does say things that are avoiding the question, or just don't even answer them entirely. And when I think about it now, I'm like, look, I can separate my love for the Hitch, but he was a journalist, and ethics is not a fundamental of journalism, right? And this isn't saying anything about Hitch as a person, but how he approaches subjects. I don't know. I mean, it feels awfully general, and uncomprehensive in the very serious sense, the scholarly sense. So whilst they aren't scholarly books, I think they'd agree. What I can maybe agree with is that they kind of pretended as if they were. Um, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I I hate to say that one has to have this sort of deep philosophical understanding and framework under their belt to dismiss the idea of organized religion or of God or of the major faiths. I think that I don't think that's required. I think it's not, I don't think it's quite necessary, because, it's the arguments they give, I think, um, are enough for an individual to say, well, maybe this isn't the way I want to spend my life, or maybe I'm not going to go terribly far down this rabbit hole if they're looking for answers and they're looking at Christianity or whatever. I don't want to put up these barriers to, everyone on earth, that they have to be a deep scholar and an expert on Oppie and on Mackey and on all these traditionally like well-respected atheists, and who have these deep philosophical arguments of God where you almost need a degree in mathematics to follow along with the argument. I just don't think that's necessary. Like, I think some of these ideas are rhetoric and are, just lines of thinking and such, but I think oftentimes that can be enough. I don't think you need a PhD to dismiss Christianity. To my opinion.
Yeah,
Now,
the,
I think
go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, I think those arguments need to be had on that level, but I hesitate to make that a qualifier for every person who comes to the subject. Like, I think if someone is a fan of the New Atheists and has seriously thought about these things, and then they just moved on with their life, they just kind of left behind their faith and they moved on, and they, the rest of their life isn't spent like crazy people like you and I, where we just keep going, we can't get away from it, so I hesitate into, to those sort of things. Where I then take your side is the people that stake their lives on it. If you're going to stake your life on it, if you're going to be a preacher, if you're going to spend your years, being a fisher of men, or if you're going to be someone who is going to, try to engage with these topics on an increasingly deeper level, then yes, you have to get beyond the new atheist arguments, and you have to get beyond the frivolous, the idea of just, oh, it's all silliness, Christianity is just nonsense, and God is the tooth fairy. And like, oh, okay, we don't have 2,000 years of unparalleled tradition, that helped found the Western world in, tooth fairyism and the mythicism, the myth around the tooth fairy. But at the same time, if God doesn't exist and the tooth fairy doesn't exist, like there are some ways in which it's a valid analogy, but it's not, it's clearly not the same thing.
Yeah, and again, part of it is satirical as well. I mean, on the part of on the part of Hitchens and Dawkins. I mean, look, whilst they are having these discussions, they are a bit tongue in cheek, and I think we have to understand that, the difference between a one-liner and an actual argument that they sincerely mean to make, right? And that can definitely be misunderstood. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, now that we've sort of got the past laid out, and when the seeds of doubt were flourishing, and the resources that you found, what were what were the effects of you embodying that doubt and actually going forward and admitting it, and how has your life changed as well? I mean, these are two fairly big questions, so maybe go with the first one first.
So the effects were not easy, to say the least. I did not want to deconvert. It was probably the most painful thing like I've had to go through, because I was very seriously committed. And I don't think, you go well, I don't think most people, at least, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone else, but I went to Bible college to be a pastor because this meant everything to me. And I thought if this was the reality, I needed to share this reality with everyone else. And I realized I could not stand on a stage with a clear conscience and preach these things, it was very difficult. And as time went by and more pillars fell away, it was very painful. And I mean, my family is very, very religious still. All of them are, in my immediate family, I mean. And just I'm very close to some of them, and watching their reaction as I walked away was very difficult and remains so to this day. And so that was very hard on me. And in college, though, my immediate surroundings, my friends, they all sort of knew, just because you can't really hide these sort of things from your friends if you're constantly talking about if you're in a Bible college or at a university studying these things. And I didn't leave. I should say that I didn't leave my school when I started having these doubts. I actually very much enjoyed what I studied. So even after I was gotten to the point where I thought, oh, I don't think I can continue my life in this path, I changed my major to comparative religion from preaching, and just stayed. And I studied Greek, Koine Greek, and comparative religion, and ended up staying on and graduating with honors. And I was sort of known by some as the campus atheist. There were a few of us, though. I wasn't the only one. I mean, it's not a unique experience to go to a Christian university and to fall away. It's very, very common and becomes increasingly so. So there were others. But my friend group didn't really change. They were all what I would consider a real friends, in the sense that, at the end of the day, what mattered was how we treated each other, and not that we shared the same worldview, even if we were all very serious about that worldview. And so that was kind of the repercussions. And I continued on and studied and got my degree, and it was very much worthwhile. And what was the second part of that question?
Well, firstly, I just want to say, comparatively speaking, it sounds like you didn't have too many immediate frustrations apart from the family. I mean, the family, that is obviously a very personal thing, a very intimate thing. I suppose I just want to develop more on that, and it leads to the other question, which is, to the present, not only when you left, but to the present. How is your family now, and your friends, let's say, how have things developed from leaving at the time to now? And how long ago, by the way, just so we have a time scale.
Yeah, so I began university in fall of, well, I was at that university. I did it for a year somewhere else, but then when I began at that university, it was fall of 2013. And then in the late 2014, I had pretty much fallen away, and then it maintained that trajectory throughout college. And I should say, along with the family bit, that it was extremely just as bad. It was hard on myself, just because my entire worldview, my way of life, the future in which I imagined myself living, how I imagined myself living, it was almost like a complete loss of identity. It was very, very strange. And it was very difficult, because I then had this, I had to completely reorient my place in the universe, and how I thought about life and meaning and myself, and just really everything. Everything takes on to meaning, love, relationships. And so it was very, very difficult. And C.S. Lewis describes himself as the most reluctant convert into Christianity, that he was dragged, I believe, kicking and screaming into the kingdom of God. And I felt as if I was dragged kicking and screaming out of the kingdom of God. Right. Many a tearful night, just praying for anything, just to feel God's presence, or to feel that there was some truth in this. And it didn't come. And I examined my life critically. I felt, is there some sort of sin in my life that is preventing me from being able to feel connection with God. I'm looking at things like that. Here I am, have uprooted my whole life, moved hundreds and hundreds of miles away from where I grew up. I'm in a different place. I've completely dedicated my life to this. And this is when I lose all sense of connection to God. So it was very difficult. I don't want to minimize that, how, like the process itself, because I was very serious about it. And I hope some of that seriousness is reflected in my life now, which you said, because now I'm still engaged with the subject. It still very much interests me. And some of my family knows I have taken up this project, and that I'm vocal in the sense that if you ask me, I'll tell you what I think. I'm not on the street corners or, being belligerent. And many of my friends, it dwindles as the years go by now, because many of them have lost their faith as well. But many of my friends still to this day are religious, or if they're not religious, they have some sort of formal belief in God. And I think I've lost one friend over the course of the whole time. The rest, I'd like to think I had real, like I said before, real friendships with. And I think Thomas Jefferson said that he never felt politics or religion was a point of division amongst friends. A disagreement about politics or religion wasn't a reason to not be friends with someone. And I think that's very true. And if Hitchens taught the same lesson as well, that you could be friends with both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, although from his personal life, that didn't stop him from having heated discussions. But at the same time, ending that discussion, as I think Martin Amis said, I believe, or Salman Rushdie, one of them, and he'd be as friendly as ever, and he'd be exactly the same as he was at the beginning. But during that discussion, he would be on full speed and velocity there. I mean, yeah, and that's a really difficult skill, isn't it? Because we can feel passionate about something, and that's really difficult in the sense of it obviously seeping through our skin, right? And through body behavior, body language. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to express oneself without being openly aggressively passionate sometimes, and also maintaining respect for another person, and them maintaining respect enough to listen to you as well. And that's something that I've tried to grow in, and I think that I've succeeded in a sense, because I can express myself but not also diminish the other person's views at the same time. And I'm sure that you, as you say, you feel the same and you do the same. But obviously, especially atheists do it as well as Christians or Muslims, but clearly there is a correlation between the fundamental religious types that they are on street corners. To be fair though, God mandates the spread of the gospel, so in a sense it is literally ordered to occur. So it's literally written down to do so, and I guess you can't argue against a divine mandate. Am I right?
No, yeah, you're completely right. Yeah, it was Salman Rushdie also once said of Christopher Hitchens that he was enjoyable to disagree with, and I thought that was about one of the highest forms of praise an individual could hope to have granted upon them. I have tried now. I strive to be someone who's enjoyable to disagree with, and I was not always. I felt very much like a dog. By the time I graduated university, I felt very much like a dog who was in the corner, fending off pitchforks and such, because I was the only person, one of the only people who, disagreed. And it's not an easy thing to be in a university where everyone or almost everyone completely disagrees with you. And when I got out, I was angry. This was, 3 or 4 years ago now. I was very angry. I was angry just at the idea that I'd spent my whole life in this and it wasn't true. And I was very difficult to talk to, I'm sure. about these sorts of things. And the conversations that I did have with my family were not great. And I take a good portion of the responsibility for the trajectory of those discussions. And as I have had time to, cool and to think about these things and to not be attending chapel 3 days a week, and constantly be and be in that environment, it's made me much, much, more balanced in my conversation and in my approach. And I think that's just part of maturing and of growing up. And you realize that, saying you were lied to your whole life isn't quite the same thing as you were just raised in a tradition that so many other people were. You grow up, you be mature about those sorts of things. And you become someone who can hopefully have those conversations. And I think it's a mark of a intellectually, at least somewhat secure, as opposed to insecure individual, who can have conversations like this, and not be aggressive and just completely freak out and just jump down your throat and at every turn of phrase. So I think it's a very important skill, and that's something I've tried to cultivate as I've grown older.
Yeah, well, I think from what you say you were in comparison to now, obviously there has been a change, a profound one at that, and a lot of learning along the way, and that's all part of the process of growing up in general, and it just depends on what we engage with, that we learn about. I did want to ask, did you sort of develop this nihilism? Like, how was your journey at the deepest depths? What, I mean, if you're comfortable describing that, I mean, because for many who deconvert, they fall into this sometimes permanent, but often, or most of the time, hopefully temporary, pit of nihilism, and they become self-destructive and, well, hateful. You've already described was a trait. So I'm just wondering, was there any of that? How far did that sort of reach?
I don't think, and I didn't think then, right, that there's any sort of, you lose this sense of, I hate using these words, but like ultimate purpose, or but I never lost my love of life. And I never lost the conviction that the way I treated other people and the way other people made me feel in my relationships with my significant other or my friends didn't matter. To me, what does it mean? Like, people like to say that if it doesn't matter in eternity, or it doesn't matter a billion years from now, then it doesn't matter at all. And I think that is a wretched way to live one's life. It matters. It clearly matters the way you treat people just every day. Why do we have to have this sort of ultimate internal backdrop to everything that is the only way in which we can create the contrast necessary to bring about meaning? I reject that entirely as a mode of meaning, as the only way that one can experience meaning in their life. So I didn't, I guess you could say that I agree with the premise of nihilism, and that, like, there's no maybe ultimate meaning, but the way in which most nihilists live their life, or they're all very pessimistic, and everything, nothing has any meaning, and it leads to depression. That just wasn't a road I went down. I loved life, and I loved living, and I love learning. And so to me, I didn't fall into this pit of despair. It just wasn't something that happened for me.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I mean, people like William Lane Craig or Frank Turek try and imply that the only person's values and fundamental principles in life are predicated on this religion aspect. But like you said, you had interests independent from your belief. And so when you lost that belief, you had actually a foundation to still stand on. Whereas, and this is what happens, I'm sure, in many cases, the foundation is so predominantly set in this religious ethos that that is all they have. And when it's taken away from them, they're falling. And that is the permanent nihilism that I'm sure many have found themselves in. But I'm very glad that you had something, you had a backdrop, you had this critical mentality of, okay, well, there are things still, regardless of moral relativism and and mortality, there's still things to value as things are going on in a temporary way. And I think that is a caricature of, William Lane Craig makes, Frank Turek, a lot of these religious figureheads. They just make it out as if you lose your faith, you've got nothing. It's like, I mean, what are you talking about? It's just absurd that religion is just a sort of a lens to view the world, and to say that's the only option, or even that you need that lens in the first place, that is just so absurd. When something's just so ridiculous that it's even difficult to summarize all the different things possibly that are wrong with it. It's one of those things that is just such a broad statement to make, such a it's just such a bad argument, basically. And what you were talking about earlier, I like the principle, don't raise your voice, but improve your argument. I've always tried to embody that sort of saying. Even a few years ago when I was just getting into atheism, I would just think to myself, just think about the argument, not the rhetoric. Think about the argument. I mean, when you got a good argument, that's when you can justify the rhetoric.
Right.
As I'm sure you'd agree. So I wanted to ask as well, what is your advice for somebody who is having second thoughts about their faith? What would you recommend that they do, or think, or how would you guide them through that particular time from your experience, strictly?
It's a good question. I think they should be fearless. I think they should have self-belief. And I think if you're going to have faith in anything, it should be in yourself. If you're going to have unwarranted belief in anything, put that unwarranted belief in yourself. And then at least maybe then you can live up to that belief. I think you should be gracious to those who have brought you up in the way in which you've been brought up. I think you should be thoughtful, and I think you should take your time. I think you should be very serious about what you read. And I think that if you haven't read seriously the arguments for your religion, the apologetics that exist for your religion, that you should. You really don't understand a viewpoint or an argument until you've read it from the other perspective. That is critical. You do not understand atheism or atheists because you've heard your pastor talk about them on Sundays. You understand them once you read them, and once you read them with as best you can an open mind. And try your very best to be unoffendable as you go throughout life. When I first came across Hitch, he was so flippant in his treatment of Christianity, something that was very dear to me, but it didn't hurt my feelings. I'd like to think I had enough confidence in myself and in what I believed. It didn't hurt my feelings. It actually struck me and made me think, wow, this individual is not losing sleep at night over the idea that he's going to hell. And to me, that was just like this radical shift of perspective. And so I would suggest you be unoffendable. And when people present an argument to you, do your best to detach yourself from your beliefs and listen honestly and openly.
I think that's a very sincere and honest perspective of the matter. Somebody who's going through such a horrific thing. I mean, I would categorize it as, because it is quite literally a shift of ethos, of being, to borrow a lobster daddy phrasing there from Jordan Peterson.
I just got tickets to see him next year.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, I was supposed to see him 3 years ago, but COVID hit, and
Yep.
well, I think it was actually first it was his health, and then it was COVID. If I get the time, or maybe it's the other way around. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was supposed to see him 3 years ago, and I'm still waiting for him to continue his tour. But apparently, he's got a new one coming, and he hasn't even mentioned the one that was before. So I'm really confused. Yeah, so it's cool you got tickets. So I mean, yeah, it should be something. I think it is an advantage though to see him now rather than before, because I don't know about you, but a lot of his ideas, I I just immerse myself so much into his work, all of his videos more or less, that I don't know. I'm not really hearing many new things from him lately. Um, I think he's going to talk more about Islam soon, and I'm looking forward to that because he has admitted that he is ignorant of that religion, so of Islam. So I'm looking forward to that. Although I think Muhammad Hijab is is going to talk to him, which I just can't put two and two together there. Some alienating, obnoxious bully personality talking to a rather laid back intellectual guy. I mean, like Peterson, it's the combination just doesn't sit well with me intuitively. It's just weird to see them both together.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah. So the last thing that I wanted to ask you is, now you've mentioned one book, but I did want to get some book recommendations from you for the audience or anyone, um, not specific, but also specific if you wish to religion, leaving faith. Just your top books that you could think off the top of your head.
So I'll mention again, The Divinity of Tao. That is a really good one. It's a really great place to start. And he does both a argument against traditional religion, but then also takes aim at the new atheists. And I don't agree completely with his criticisms, because again, I think he is looking for something that isn't quite there. But I think that's a good place to start. Beyond that, I think I still think the new atheists are a good introduction. Um, I think a lot of that it's just they have this different way of thinking about these sorts of things. It's not like you're not going to get the philosophical arguments maybe, but you're going to get different ways of thinking about ideas. Like, when you first hear the idea of why did God have to sacrifice himself to these sort of ideas, or why, or Christopher
Yeah.
Hitchens, he's got that famous line where he's like, he crosses his arms, like, for 2,000 years heaven
Yeah.
sent, or for about 2 million years, or however many, I think he said 200,000. He's like, 200,000 years heaven sits with arms folded, and then only in the Middle East finally 2,000 years ago he says, let us appear to these, it's those sort of things. That's just rhetoric, but when you think about it, it's a very eye-opening sort of, it's very different. It's a sort of perspective that you haven't got in the past. And I think that can be more impactful at the beginning than some of these, you get into some of these dense works of
Yeah.
traditional arguments. So I would say the New Atheists can be a good place to start. I'm of course going to plug Hitch. God is Not Great. Mortality is a great short read that he talks about religion, about the idea of dying, and dying without religion and dying without faith. That's a great place to start. Something you and I have both been reading, I think you've already completed it, is it's up here somewhere, is Hitch's collection of non-believers, his favorite non-believers throughout the years. So it's The Portable Atheist is the title. And that is a good run from very, very early on, the past 2,000 years of thought that you can kind of pick up on it and glean from there. So those are a few. Nietzsche is always great. I think The Antichrist is fantastic. I've read it multiple times, and it is annotated and marked and bracketed all over. So if you want to get into that, I'd say go ahead with that as well, because you can't really start exploring atheism without getting at least a taste for Nietzsche.
Oh yeah, well, we all grow a taste for Nietzsche at some point or another.
Grow a taste or a mustache, one of the two.
I've done both.
there's no hope for you now, James.
Oh, no hope, no hope. For anyone wondrous of that, watch my The Joyous Science, also known as the Gay Science review of that. It's shameful when I watch it now because I just look so ridiculous, but it was in the sincere love of Nietzsche himself. So yeah, thank you for coming on my channel and talking about your experiences and about atheism. I appreciate it very much, and I look forward to your new Doubt Society podcast episodes. I just a short question: are you going to have believers on the podcast? Have you considered that?
Yes, I was supposed to have one on, and I think we will schedule eventually. I would like to have some on. I would like to have individuals represented from two different opposing viewpoints, whether it be certain political items or just about faith, and have them go at it while I maybe try to be a bit of a peacemaker in the middle and sort of mediate. Yes, I'm very open to it. It's just a matter of finding the right individuals. I can't just pick up certain, so you got to have the right individual to have a healthy and thorough discussion. So very much open to that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just kind of, as I'm reading and spending time in this sort of group of people, I'm just people that strike my interest, or that I can get to reply to my emails. That's who I'm kind of just bringing in. Yeah, more than happy to have on the faithful, though. So if you're watching this and you would like to be a member or be a guest on Doubt Society, feel free to reach out.
Your details will be in my description. Yeah, thank you again, Riley. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully we'll correspond in some time soon. No doubt, regarding the hitch again and again. Thank you. And yeah, I'll see you soon, man.
All right. Well, much appreciated. Thank you for having me on. It was great. I appreciate being able to share my story.
Hello. Is it going now? Let me just see. I think it is. Okay.
I can't. Is it going? Oh, yes, it is. I see it now.
All right. Let's put a straight face on. Okay. I'm gonna probably leave some of this in, actually.
What are you doing to me, James?
Okay.